It's Tuesday, January 14th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. And it is a hell of a day to talk ball. Wildcard weekend is officially in the books. And joining me to do just that is Andy Behrens. Andy, what's going on, buddy?
Oh, I just want you to know there's no place I'd rather be. We're coming off a weekend in which we got touchdowns from Rashad Bateman, Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin, Nico Collins, Ladd McConkey. There's nobody I'd rather speak with this fine morning than you, Matt Harmon.
Oh, well, you're already making me feel happy to be here and happy to be alive, quite frankly. What an electric set of players to score touchdowns on Wildcard weekend, which was not an electric slate of football games. Let's put it that way. A lot of blowouts. And before we get into the games, and we're going to break down all of the games that happened, we're going to talk winners, we're going to talk losers, we're going to talk big picture takeaways, micro takeaways from the games. We have a lot to discuss, but I do just want to get one minor note on the state of wildcard weekend off my chest from this game, because it obviously stinks to see a bunch of blowouts, which is what we got. I think the average point margin was over 17 points from the games that we watched. Only one of them really was, quote, competitive, which was obviously Commanders Bucks. We'll talk about that game, of course, here very shortly. We're going to go in chronological order, so we'll get to that one pretty much right in the first segment. But I understand that's frustrating. I understand that's not like the most entertaining product to watch. And like, I am with people on that. Okay. I'm with the frustration there. I was itching for the sleepy time tea very, very early in the game last night. Let's just put it that way. However, like, this is just what wildcard weekend is going to be. And I don't mean to say that there is, like, just submit to the greed of the NFL and like, there is no point in rebellion, but there really is no point in rebellion. Like, we're never going back to what I think was perfect, which was 6 teams make the playoffs from each conference. Like, the 7th seed is completely useless. None of those 7th seed teams are almost never are they relevant. I believe they've only won 2 games like since they created the 7th seed. We don't need it. Tough look, okay? Like, they're never going back. They're probably closer to expanding the playoff field than they are to decreasing it, because guess what? The money keeps rolling in. Yeah. So, like, that just is what it is. What we have to do with this whole thing, the fact that this is what wildcard weekend is going to be, we have to take joy in the fact that, like, we need to find like talking points. And that's what these games really provide, is a lot of source of debate. And there's stupid debate out there. Okay. I'm very frustrated with some, sports media folks that are just like creating segments on their shows to basically fight 2 tweets that they saw over the weekend or something like that. And I'm guilty of that too. Okay. I am guilty of that too. But because the games are just going to stink for the vast majority of wildcard weekend, we have to find some kind of joy in, like, hey, let's pull apart these threads. Let's take, like I said, big picture talking points about the game and really test our brains in that way. Because, like I said, the reality is that's what wildcard weekend is going to be. And I've been itching to talk about this stuff. Like, I'm almost disappointed that we waited till Tuesday morning to record this damn show, because I've been so excited to talk about a lot of these things with you here, Andy. So I just had to get that off my chest. Like, that is what wildcard weekend is now at this point.
No, it's all fair. I feel like people wouldn't be so, the fact that Minnesota, LA ended with such a dreary second half and was so decided by the time the second half kicked off. If the weekend would have ended on Commanders Bucks, I think we're probably feeling a little bit better about it. We also had, even though everything was a blowout ostensibly, we had at least 1 or 2 games that I feel like should have been close, and just weren't. So there really is a lot to talk about, and I'm all for more teams making the playoffs. Actually, I don't have a problem with that. And you're so right. There's just not an example of a professional league in which, once we have X number of teams in the playoffs, they're like, no, we're going to scale that back. No, this is not going to happen. So it's not even worth discussing.
Especially in these 1-game elimination. This is what the NFL playoffs is. It's 1 game. It's not like a series or anything like that. Theoretically, anything can happen, but in a series, the better team is going to win more often than not. So in the single game elimination, more often than not, the haves are going to beat up on the have-nots, and I think there's this weekend really cemented to me that the gap between the haves and like the tier 1 teams, and by the way, we didn't even see the Lions and the Chiefs this weekend, but like the teams that are on tier 1 and even tier 2, there is a big gap. Like there's the phrase talent gap is going to come up a lot on this show. But let's waste no more time with this sort of big picture existential nonsense, even though I could talk existential nonsense for the entire hour plus we're going to have this show. Let's talk through the first game here, which I was expecting so much more from Rams Vikings. We got Rams 27, Vikings 9. Scott and I previewed this game. We could not have been more wrong about how this game was going to go. We expected a lot of points in this game. Scott expected the Vikings to win pretty emphatically. I was with him on that take, and very much wrong about that one. Let's talk, like I said, we're going to talk winners and then losers when we go through these games. So let's start with the Rams. Andy, I'm curious what your biggest takeaway from this game is after watching it last night.
Yeah, I'm glad we're starting with the Rams, first of all, because I feel like everybody's analysis of this game just skips ahead to Sam Darnold, and frickin' credit to the Rams, right? Just wild and incredibly unfortunate circumstances in which we had a game in which things were so much more difficult for the home team than for the visiting team. Just an absolutely wild week. The Rams overcome that. They also, I was really questioning their decision to rest everybody in week 18. And that looks really good now, right? Like one of these teams looked like it had 2 weeks to prep for a playoff game. And the other team looked reasonably like they poured all of themselves into week 18 and didn't get through it, and then had to show up for for the wild card round. You could just tell, I thought, opening drive from the Rams, that they looked a lot more comfortable in the postseason than the Vikings. First play, Puka Nacua shockingly wide open for 27 yards, nearly 30 yards. First play from scrimmage, right? Stafford gets the Vikings to jump on that 4th and 1 deep in the red zone, and then the next play is that easy pitch and catch touchdown to Kyren Williams. I mean, they were just a step ahead on that first drive, and that told you a lot. I thought Stafford found easy answers to pressure. It's not like the Vikings didn't try to blitz, didn't try to heat him up a little bit, but there was an easy answer that he got to almost immediately every time it happened. And so, their attempts to really disrupt him just didn't work. They had a little bit of good fortune in this game, right? There were a couple of very nearly fumbles by Kyren Williams that weren't quite. There was the Stafford. Is it a pass? Is it a fumble? This is more or less a pass, right? Like they came through a couple of those situations that could have been disastrous. But overall, they looked supremely ready. And then that game was dull in the second half. Nothing happened. No points. It was a brutal way to end wildcard weekend. But a really impressive performance from the Rams overall, in a game, by the way, in which they actually they committed, I think, 10 penalties in this one to Minnesota's 2, right? Like, it wasn't a perfect game from the Rams, but they just came out so clean. And it was an incredibly impressive first half, both obviously offensively and then defensively. What they were able to do to the Vikings was really something. And I know we'll get to Sam Darnold. And probably the single most important stat from this game, obviously, is that the Rams sack him 9 times. It wasn't just the total number of sacks, by the way. It's the fact that he lost 82 yards on those sacks. I mean, we can't lose 9 yards a sack, right? You can't run back. You can't retreat backwards for 4 or 5 yards as you're getting sacked every time. So that was a problem. But it wasn't just the 9 sacks. It's the fact that 8 different players got credit for those 9 sacks, and 12 different defensive players had pressures in this game. So the pressure was coming from everywhere all at once. Really great defensive game plan. And obviously it got to the Vikings quarterback.
Yeah, we will of course get to the Sam Darnold of it all. But I'm also glad that we're starting with the Rams on this, just because I would argue that this might be the most impressive win of the 2024 season. Obviously, it's a damn playoff game.
Yeah.
That's more important than anything that anybody won in the regular season. However, this is also, it's the circumstances around this team right now. The fact that they're playing a home playoff game in frickin' Arizona because of the wildfires going on in Los Angeles. Like every football player on earth will talk to you about routines and schedules and the importance of all that stuff. And to be disrupted in that way, I mean, their practice facility, the guys some of these guys live in the areas where the fires are actually happening. Like, it's not the fires are not happening near SoFi Stadium necessarily, but certainly like air quality is affected in Los Angeles, even if you're not like in the direct path of fires, like evacuations and things like that. But I mean, just again, to have all of that looming over this and then to go out and win emphatically against, again, we will get to the Sam Darnold and the Vikings of all of it, but a good team, one of the best teams of this season on both sides of the ball. And I think to really, am I wrong in saying dominate both sides of the ball here? Because we'll talk, well, again, defense is one thing, but I would say offensively too. Like, Stafford has had issues under pressure this season, but when you blitz him and they're able to block that thing up, he has slaughtered blitzes all season long, and he was just completely like mind-numbingly efficient against Brian Flores and the blitz in this game. They also got big plays from the run game, which they haven't got a lot of big plays from that run game all season long. So I thought it was a squeaky clean offensive effort. And then in that case, if Stafford's going to play like that on that side of the ball, where the fact that they don't even have they did have Tyler Higbee in this game, who also, that's something to monitor. He left the game and was ruled out and like getting a lot of tests done. So his status is obviously up in the air for the rest of the postseason. But I've been bemoaning the fact that they don't have a second pass catcher to Puka Nacua. Cooper Kupp, 1 target, 1 catch, and it wasn't I think he was catchless in the first half of this game. That didn't even matter. Because Stafford was just, like I said, mind-numbingly efficient in this game, particularly when they sent those blitzes. Like, if he's going to play like that, you have to keep up on the other side. And the Vikings obviously could not keep up, because what an impressive performance by the Rams defense, which we should note. Not only do they have a first-year coordinator in Chris Shula, who hats off to him, Sean McVay just continues to have his staff picked over left and right and just uncover new gems on his coaching staff. I think McVay obviously has cemented himself, I think, as a top 3 coach in the league right now. Maybe he might be like the 101 coach right now if you were drafting them. This is also the most inexpensive defense in the league because they're littered with rookies. And this also isn't just like an out-of-nowhere performance. If you look at it, it's actually been building to this. The Rams' point totals since week 15, 6 allowed to the 49ers, 9 allowed to the Jets, 9 allowed to the Cardinals, 30 points allowed to the Seahawks in week 18, but it's worth noting, obviously, they were not playing everybody. Kobe Turner, 20% of the snaps in that game, Braden Fisk, 20%, Jared Verse, 20%, Byron Young, like all their guys up front didn't play very much in that game, and then 9 points to this Vikings team. So the Rams defense is young. It's really good. They continue to hit on draft picks, and this is definitely like I said, I think it might be the most impressive win of the season right now.
Yeah, the Rams, the number of times that the Rams actually got to Darnold only rushing 4 was super impressive, and that's for the entirety of NFL history, football history. If you can get to the quarterback without actually blitzing, that's that's a huge advantage. And they were able to do that. When they did bring pressure, when they did blitz, it was creative. It was always coming from different places. That Durant sack from the blitzing from the slot, that was great. I thought the Verse strip sack fumble return was just such a killer. It was a great play by him, obviously, great play by the Rams defense generally, but man, that really changed the math. The math just got so hard for them to come back after you get a defensive touchdown like that, and the Rams were so in control offensively. It didn't end the game exactly, but it came pretty close to ending the game.
I think that's really where things flipped. And I think because we'll talk about the Rams, obviously, we can move to the Vikings now, because that's like the more interesting, I think, big picture conversation. And this is a good teeing off point to it, because I do agree that sack by Ahkello Witherspoon, the blitz that then Jared Verse picks up and does like a little defying gravity move to jump into the end zone. I mean, he was Wicked was playing in the background of that damn thing, so like That was really where I agree. Things flipped there. And like the story of this game is obviously Sam Darnold eating sacks like it's closing time at the Golden Corral, man. Like the buffet was closing and he was loading up the plate. He's sacked 9 times by the Rams in this game. 9 times, which ties a playoff record. And let's really talk about these sacks, because there are a lot of just wild notes to get into. You mentioned it, only blitzed twice on the 9 sacks in terms of those plays. Shil Kapadi of The Ringer noted that the 6 sacks Sam Darnold took in the first half were the most by any quarterback in a playoff game of the last 25 years. Bill Smith, who's the director of NFL Next Gen Stats Research, also noted that only 2 of Sam Darnold's 6 sacks that he took in the first half came in less than 4.4 seconds, and none were faster than 3.2, which is just outrageous. If you look over the course of the entire game, Andy, he had 2 sacks that took 5+ seconds, including a 5.8 second absolute banger early in the fourth quarter. I mean, you just can't do that. Like Justin Fields is looking at that and saying like, hey man, you need to get rid of the ball. And I like, to me, that's just, it's a shame. Honestly, it was one of those performances, and I tweeted this, that I was like uncomfortable watching Sam Darnold play in this game.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. You absolutely nail that, because it did get pretty cringy I would say by the late first half, right? And I'm not sure. I'd have to rewatch a little bit of it, but I'm not sure how much of it is just they don't give him a lot of easy answers. Surely there were some easy answers out on the field to be had. He just didn't get to them because there was such a contrast between, the opening couple of drives for the Rams. The Vikings are bringing pressure. They're trying to disrupt him, and there's just an easy button every time, and Stafford gets to it very quickly. The ball's coming out, and then you watch what is happening to Sam Darnold. Again, it wasn't just the 9 sacks; it's the yardage that he's losing on some of these. Just like his instinct to retreat as soon as he's getting pressure, right? And I don't know how many times he lost an additional 5 yards that probably didn't need to be lost. Stafford was sacked a couple times, only lost 7 yards. 82 yards lost to sacks is just it's just unthinkable. And you're right. He was back there forever. I experienced a lot of Bears football. I've been watching this, but I can't think of many instances in which either Caleb or Justin Fields over the last couple of years was back there for nearly 6 seconds and still got dropped. That's just brutal.
Yeah, and I mean some of these sacks, like 1st and 10, you lose 7 yards. Forget it. Like you're screwed.
Yeah.
2nd and 3, you lose 12 yards. You're back behind the original line of scrimmage, and these are like 1st and 2nd quarter plays. It was brutal. Obviously the offensive line doesn't cover itself in glory in this game either. That's of course part of it, but you can't hold the ball for that long and expect anything good to happen. And it's very reminiscent of what happened in Week 18 when I think I said this on the show. Anytime that Sam Darnold would boot out of the pocket, nothing good happened. And that was his instinct consistently in this game too. It was never to step up. And I do think he had pockets to step up into, readjust, give those receivers like an extra half. God, they have all this time, in the world here, but like an extra half a beat to uncover, get in the right position. And he just never did that. Instead, he would get out, he would like move to the side and just, that's not like that is not going into creation mode to give your receivers chances and things like that. So it was a brutal night for Darnold. Like I said, I felt bad for him in this game. I felt like uncomfortable watching it, and I think this changes. I think the last 2 weeks changes everything in terms of the calculus of what's going to happen with the Vikings in the future, which, we can talk about here. I'm not putting this all on Sam Darnold. Obviously, everybody's got to wear, you get blown out like this, everybody's got to wear the crown of shame. I don't think Kevin O'Connell had a very good game in this one. Yeah. He looked like he was calling plays to sim to the end of the game. Joe Buck even saying, do the Vikings know they're down 18 points? Because they really looked like they were trying to run out the clock. It's a brutal performance from everybody involved here, but certainly I do think this is going to change the calculus of what happens with the Vikings at the quarterback position.
Yeah, I feel like we were just talking about how, and this was obviously off the Packers game, and Darnold throws for nearly 400 yards, and it's 3 touchdowns, and man, you win 14 games in the regular season and then one or two more in the postseason. Like, we got to bring him back. There's almost no question about it. You can't move on after that. But now this actually gives them a pretty easy escape route from the Sam Darnold experience, I guess. Right? Like, you gotta. We can put to rest any talk about trading JJ McCarthy. That ain't happening. I will say that I don't think, I've been covering the NFL for a long time. You're never as bad as your worst games. You're never as good as your best games and all that. And Sam Darnold did still, he had a 4,300 yard season with 35 touchdown passes. And there are 15, 16 NFL teams out there that would love to have the Vikings problems, right?
Sure.
To be a 14-win team that didn't get as far in the postseason as they wanted to. So there's going to be a market for Sam Darnold, and he did show some things during this season that were really encouraging and that we had not seen from him before. So I see some of the reactions online like, oh, did he lose $100 million? No, I don't think he lost $100 million. I don't think he lost, I don't think it's quite as catastrophic for Sam Darnold as some of the instant reactions would suggest. This is a bad couple of weeks, though.
Yeah, bad couple of weeks. And I mean, I don't know if you saw the post-game presser from Kevin O'Connell, but he talked about Sam Darnold in the tone of, I mean, he quite literally said, the journey that we went on together will always hold a special place in my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a breakup letter, man. Like that's there's a tone of finality there. And honestly, at this point, I'd be surprised if he's the week 1 starter for the Minnesota Vikings. Maybe they franchise tag him and try to trade him because they can carry that on the cap. And certainly, like I said, or like you just said, there's going to be some team that's in the market for Sam Darnold, no doubt. I think he proved himself as a guy that you can start for a course of the season, maybe even an entire season, and not be outright embarrassed. But the problem is you're just never going to get this type of season from Sam again, because especially anywhere else, because, Thor Nystrom, who's a big Vikings fan, mutual friend, he's a guy who is a big JJ McCarthy fan. So he's definitely in the bag for McCarthy, but he put this very well, that why would you pay Darnold for the statistical manifestation of his circumstances? I think that they will bet on the circumstances being good enough to develop a first-round quarterback that they're obviously very high on. It's a risk because we haven't seen McCarthy, and he had knee injuries over the course of the season. But I mean, the way McCarthy was playing the preseason, I think there's a chance that he would have been starting games for this team anyway. So let's live in a world, Andy, where Darnold's gone, McCarthy is the week 1 starter for the Vikings. Like, does that change your calculus with any of these skill position players when we're drafting in fantasy next year?
Yeah, you mentioned it's a risk. It would have been more of a risk if they actually get past this game and they make a deeper playoff run, and then we're feeling a little bit. It doesn't feel like that much of a risk right now because JJ McCarthy, very young but also a very good player. Does it change my opinion of Justin Jefferson? No. Of Jordan Addison? No. Not substantially. I think they'll try to run exactly what they ran all season. I don't have worries there. I actually think McCarthy, I don't know. I don't think of McCarthy as that different from wherever I'm going to have Michael Penix next year. That's probably where I'm going to have JJ McCarthy. I really liked him as a prospect. Again, very much on the young side, but he's had a year to watch and learn. He's got maybe, if not the best receiving tandem in the league, pretty close to it. So he's going to be in a great situation. I think JJ McCarthy is very much a preferred second quarterback in super flex leagues, and a guy that you kind of watch list in one quarterback leagues. I think there's a path to McCarthy having maybe it doesn't look exactly like Darnold's season. I mean, 4,300 yards and 35 touchdowns is those are huge marks to hit. Maybe it's not that, but 30 touchdowns, 28 touchdowns, 4,000 yards. I think that's certainly in play.
Totally in play. He will be one of the more fascinating players to kind of discuss and track over the course of the offseason. It will be fascinating to see where Sam Darnold ends up. For the Vikings, O'Connell will be back. He might be the coach of the year this year. I think Brian Flores, I'd bet, does not end up getting one of these head coaching jobs just because of obviously we know the situation with Brian Flores.
Yeah.
Like I bet he ends up back as the Minnesota Vikings coordinator. And like Wes Phillips is not a guy, their offensive coordinator, that's getting head coaching interviews. Like maybe McCown takes a coordinator job elsewhere, the quarterback coach Josh McCown. But all in all, I think this team will be back next year. They're very young and like they have a lot of really good ascending pieces. So I'd be buying Minnesota Vikings stock going forward.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of it depends on McCarthy. But let's move to the Sunday night football game, the most competitive of Wild Card Weekend. Commanders 23, Bucks 20. Andy, I mean, Jaden Daniels, what an impressive player. Like I described him after the game as weirdly calm, like almost eerily unfazed by basically anything that happens to him.
He was joking around with opposing defenders like in the fourth quarter of your first postseason game. Right?
Yeah,
like
that's a great point.
He was weirdly calm, which is great. That's what you want in that moment. That's what you want from leader of the football team, where everything is on his shoulders. Washington just like, this is a lot of analysis comes down to oversimplification, but man, Washington played such a clean game, and they never get Daniels, and they never really get the offense into like third and forever, every third down, fourth down situation, and they convert a lot of those. They were all manageable. I think they were penalty free in the first half of this game. Just a really clean game from them. And the oversimplification part is that this game basically, these are super evenly matched teams, and it came down to just a couple of preseason level mistakes made by the Bucks in late in the fourth quarter, and that decides it. And otherwise, Daniel's incredibly impressive. They get a heroic performance from De'Ami Brown out of nowhere, right? Like we've talked about this when discussing the Commanders all season, that need for a second bankable receiver alongside Terry McLaurin. And I'm sure they'll solve the problem next year. I'm sure there's going to be a line of people who want to play with Jaden Daniels after this year. So I'm sure they'll address it. But even for a week to be able to get that level of performance from somebody like De'Ami Brown, just a huge difference maker in this one.
Huge difference maker. And I mean, that's the mark of great quarterbacking, right? Like elevating players around you.
Yeah.
And De'Ami Brown's a guy that I do think is talented. Like he came into the league with some ability. He was one of these weird developmental receivers who only lined up on one side of the field at UNC and very much ran like a totally stripped down route tree. Not too uncommon for outside receivers in that particular offense, but he's a guy who's flashed a little bit, but he's never had a performance quite like this. And that's, like I said, the mark of great quarterbacking. And really, I agree with you. I was so impressed with Daniels' ability to work the middle of the field in this game and beat the blitz as well. That was sort of what was going to be the key, because I got a lot of thoughts about the Bucs and Todd Bowles and the whole thing, but Bowles can pitch a really good individual defensive game plan when he goes against a young quarterback or a quarterback who struggles against the blitz. Well, Daniels, 0.44 EPA per dropback on blitzes, was fourth best among quarterbacks in the Saturday and Sunday games. Obviously, what he did on late downs was absurd, going 9 of 15 for 108 yards and 2 touchdowns on third and fourth downs. According to Next Gen Stats, he threw past the sticks on 80% of those passes, which is just like total, like I'm not afraid, clarity. I see the field. I read the field well. And he had 72 yards with a 121.7 passer rating over the middle of the field, which is an area that this team hasn't always been able to get activated because mostly because of the personnel, in my opinion, but also some of Daniels' inclination to attack deep and outside the numbers. So not only does he win this game, is he, they kicked the game-winning field goal. There's the shot of him on the sidelines looking like it's just a regular Tuesday. Like he just won a Scrabble match against like one of his buddies or something, completely, again, unfazed. Not only there's that, but he's doing it in a way. He
just kicked a bank shot game-winning field goal in the postseason. Yeah.
Whatever. I mean, the damn kicker's out there like moving his hair like he's adjusting his flow left and right. He's tweaking out in the moment. He's nervous. Jaden Daniels, like I said, he's playing Scrabble with his buddies. He's completely unfazed. Not only is he doing that, he's doing it in ways that we don't normally see from this offense, which again, super, super impressive young player.
Yeah, very impressive young player. And I want to say, like, but part of his success on third and fourth down is, again, I watch so much Bears football. So if I'm watching the Commanders in this game, you're like, man, where are the pre-snap penalties? Where are the drive killing moments that put us in 3rd and 12 instead of 3rd and 3, 3rd and 5, right? Like they're in so many manageable situations when they get to 3rd and 4th down. And then you have to appreciate the aggression that they showed, particularly on 4th down. I thought you really saw the benefits of that aggression in the 4th quarter, even when they don't convert, right? Because they there's the sequence where they don't convert, but you've got Tampa Bay buried in their own end where mistakes get amplified, and then they make a mistake, and that's the ball game.
No punts, no turnovers in the game. Absurd stuff from the Commanders. And shout out to Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury and that entire staff, because I think they have really it's Quinn and Jaden Daniels is really an incredible pairing for just like the confidence and unflappable nature of this Commanders team. And, so many role players stepped up in this one too. Like that's going to be another thing that comes up with these winning teams, like guys that aren't stars or anything. I mean, Austin Eckler, shout out to our former co-host Austin Eckler. He's a role player for this team. He's not like a headline guy, but like they might not win that game without some of his kind of late move the ball down the field on checkdowns and things like that. Like we mentioned, De'Ami Brown, Zach Ertz playing a big role. So super impressive by Washington. They'll play Detroit next week. That's going to be a very, very fun game to watch. Let's talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here, Andy, who, oh man, I mean, you're right. Like they could easily have won this game if Graham Barton, who's been an awesome rookie center for them, doesn't, mess up the snap count. And I mean, again, it's just fantastic young player, fantastic season from Graham Barton, but he will definitely be remembered for messing up that snap count and then putting them in a situation where they're not going to go for it on 4th down. They walk in that touchdown on that drive. We might be talking about a very different ball game.
Yeah, it's crazy. Just 2 late plays, right? The fumbled exchange between Baker and Jalen McMillan that obviously leads to the Commanders' touchdown. And then they still have a chance to win, and it's 3rd and inches, and they snap the ball, and no one's ready for it. The play blows up, and somehow, miraculously, they still get it to Bucky Irving, but he loses yards. And that, and then, hey, full credit to Washington. They get the ball back, and there's, I think, over 4 minutes to go, right? And they grind out the clock. Like that was a mature drive by a rookie quarterback, right? To be able to take it over 4 minutes, kill the rest of the time in that game, never give the Bucs another chance, and then of course you bank in the winning field goal. But it was like just those 2 small sloppy mistakes that made the difference between 2 otherwise very evenly matched teams. I mean, the Bucs definitely could have won this game.
Oh, absolutely could have won this game. And I mean, even despite the fact that some of these mistakes we're talking about on offense, Ben Solak tweeted out from ESPN that the Bucs had a 65.2% dropback success rate against the Commanders last night. That's the best dropback success rate in a playoff game this century. So like the offense was definitely good enough to win this game despite some of the mistakes, which you can't like just wave your hand at some of these mistakes that were killer late in the game. But the problem is, Andy, and this is where I think the rubber is going to meet the road for Tampa Bay, is that was there any part of you that didn't think the Commanders were not at least going to get a field goal on that final drive? Yeah, that's the Bucs defense, man. And like, again, this is Todd Bowles' defense. And I don't want to sit on here. Like, I think it's easy to come on the show and like bag on Todd Bowles, and who definitely game management issues, timeout issues. Like his defense is the biggest problem with this team. Like this is an offensive first team. It's very easy to come on here and say like, well, you just got to get Bowles out of there and like promote Liam Cohen. Who even knows if Liam Cohen's a good head coach? We have no idea. But I think they got to find a way to keep him in the building somehow and continue this offensive run, because like that is the identity of this football team right now.
Yeah, we've talked about them all year in different platforms. The defense has been vulnerable all season, and then you lose a couple of cornerbacks during this game. Like Dean checking out was brutal for that team. Washington was getting whatever they wanted. No part of me doubted that Washington was going to score. It was simply a question of whether they would actually be able to grind out the remainder of that game once they got the ball back and the game was tied, which of course they did. And that's kind of been the script with Tampa Bay for much of the season. For Tampa to lose on a day when, I mean, Mike Evans just cooked Lattimore. And that hasn't ever happened, right? But just cooked him. I think he caught all 7 of his targets. In the first half, he was like 5 for 5 on his targets. He drew a huge PI flag. He just absolutely dominated that individual matchup. And for most of the game, it was, in fact, an individual matchup. For Tampa to lose on a day when he so controlled the individual, like one-on-one there, was it's just really disappointing. But also, like, you look at, I don't know, if you're a Bucs fan, there's kind of a lot to look forward to here. I feel pretty good about all the elements that I have on offense. I feel awesome about Bucky Irving. Have to feel pretty good about what you saw from McMillan late in the year. So it's not, I'd be feeling really bad today as a Vikings fan, as a fan of some of these other teams, but I'm not feeling that bad if I'm a Bucs fan.
Yeah, especially because there's still plenty of questions throughout the rest of the division. Saints general manager Mickey Loomis in his postseason presser didn't even know where they were picking in the first round. He had to be reminded that it was 9, not 10. The Panthers obviously are coming off the worst defensive performance in NFL history. Whole side of the ball that needs rebuilt there, and the Falcons are going to be breaking in a young quarterback. Like, the Bucs should be the heavy favorite to win this division again, and they have so much young talent. I agree. I'd be feeling good if I was a Tampa Bay fan, but big question. I do think big questions just about the offense if Cohen moves on, because I would say that there's a 0% chance you were going to do what you did up last year, which is move on from a good coordinator. Well, he was hired as a head coach. He went elsewhere. Move on, have that guy move on, and then upgrade. Like, that's not going to happen again. Like, odds are very low. So that's, I think, the biggest pressing question for this team, and that's going to determine a lot of like fantasy investments and things in Tampa Bay next season. Let's take our first break. When we come back, we will talk through the games that happened on Sunday, the rest of the Sunday games, right after this.
Introducing Daily Draw, the latest free-to-play game from Yahoo Sports. Daily Draw gives you a pack of 6 prediction cards every day based on the day's biggest sporting event. Download or update the Yahoo Sports app on the Apple App Store or Google Play and join the action with Daily Draw today.
All right, we're back. Andy, let's talk through the other 2 games that happened on Sunday, starting with Eagles 22, Packers 10. I know this game is kind of getting grouped into the blowout affair because, I mean, the Packers, frankly, a pretty pitiful performance in this one. Yeah. But this game was, I think, it didn't feel close because one team was just clearly so much more talented and better than the other. But with the way the Eagles offense played, and I weirdly think that Jalen Hurts is getting more media criticism as the winning quarterback, despite the fact that the other quarterback in this game threw 3 interceptions and 0 touchdowns. A lot more of the focus has been on Hurts, but I think that's just because the offense looked so stagnant. But I'll throw it to you this way, Andy. Coming out of this Eagles performance, A.J. Brown reading a damn book on the sideline. Are you more concerned with what you saw out of Philly's offense or more impressed by what you saw out of the Packers defense in a losing effort?
I'd be a little bit concerned because I'm still looking ahead to Detroit, and Detroit is whatever. Detroit's still got to get there. But Detroit is also a team that can just give 40 points to anybody. And Philadelphia's defense is outstanding. They have difference makers at every level. Very impressed by them. The Lions can still hand you 35 or 40 points, and you've got to be able to score with them. And there are some concerns because Philadelphia has been a very big play dependent offense throughout much of the year. Those big plays are some of the best highlights every week, but that's not what the experience of watching them play, moment to moment looks like, right? Like those are just the splash plays made by Saquon Barkley and A.J. Brown and great playmakers, but that's not the minute to minute of watching the Philadelphia Eagles. So I'd be a little bit concerned. I will say just within this game, you couldn't script a better start for Philadelphia. Just absolutely ridiculous. They force a fumble on the opening kick. They get a pretty friendly replay review on the recovery, then a monster gain by Saquon, And then Jalen Hurts' first pass in like a month is like a pretty easy 11-yard pitch and catch to Jahan Dotson, your guy. So that was just you couldn't start the game any better than that. Hurts not necessarily impressive throughout this one, but it was also he's missed enough time that you can tell yourself this game was it's weird to say it of a playoff game, but a bit of a rust buster for him.
Yeah, and I just think that I come away from this a little more impressed by Green Bay's defense than I am discouraged by Philly's offense. One, because I don't know, like I expect these games from Jalen Hurts every now and again. Like when you can pitch a good defensive game plan at him, and when there's some like timely blitzes and things like that, he's gonna struggle a little bit. We just know that about him. But at the same time, like I do think Green Bay's secondary played extremely well. I think they were on top of most of what the Eagles wanted to do and I don't think the Eagles wanted to do very much from a passing game standpoint. Maybe they just felt like, hey, we have the edge defensively on their offense. We have Saquon Barkley. Not that Barkley, like he had the one play that he slid down on. I can't believe that there are like idiots. I lost my anytime touchdown bet on Saquon Barkley because he slowed down. Hey, it's called sports betting, okay? You are gambling on outcomes, and sometimes that happens. And by the way, if you're betting on anytime touchdowns, I don't care who the player is, taking a little bit of risk with that, all right? So grow up. Like, have a little bit of personal accountability for yourself out there, people. But, like, that was really the one big, massive play that Barkley was going to rip off. But otherwise, it was just kind of like a steady Eddie sort of performance from him from a ground game perspective. But I just don't think the Eagles tried to do very much from a pass game perspective because maybe they didn't have to. But I do think they're capable of beating up on if they face Detroit, obviously they got to get there. And the Detroit Lions have to get there. But if they face a team that, I don't know. It will be really interesting to see what the Rams defense does to this team next week. And we'll talk about it in the previous show because they played so much like cover one, which is very out of type for the Rams defense and a lot more man coverage stuff. And that's actually typically what the Eagles beat up on. So they do have matchup advantages against both of the defenses if they face the Rams and if they face the Lions. That is at least worth noting. But I just think Green Bay's, it's in a loss, but their defense played pretty well in this one.
Yeah, no, it's fair to say. Obviously, Philadelphia it wouldn't be any kind of shock if Philadelphia represents the NFC in the Super Bowl. I don't mean to sound down on them or anything like that. And again, Jalen Hurts hadn't played in a while, so we can forgive a performance that's maybe a little bit sluggish. And that Philly's defense is just so impressive. And I want to credit them for some of what the Packers weren't able to do. Obviously, the Packers losing a couple of receivers in this game kind of compounded matters and made things almost impossible for them. So Philadelphia, very impressive team. But I do think if we get into a matchup with Detroit, we've got to see the best version of that offense.
Let's talk about those Packers and what that defense did to Green Bay, because I think this is the third time in just over a month where a really good defense has outclassed a Packers offense that, I want to be clear, it is still a good unit. They rank 8th in EPA per play on the season. They're 11th in success rate in games that Jordan Love has started. That is actually a slight drop off from 2023 where they were 5th and 8th in those two metrics, but still generally this is a good offense. They obviously have a really good run game, but again, just like the Vikings game and just like the Lions game on Thursday night, a good defense was able to just, I think, blot out basically any big plays from this passing attack with a very highly paid quarterback and a lot of interesting skill position players. Jordan Love completes just 27% of his passes of 10 plus air yards for 58 yards and all 3 of his interceptions in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I really thought, the way I tend to look at a lot of playoff games is, what's the hinge point in this one? Where does it all turn? I thought it was his second interception. There's like half a minute remaining in the first half. Green Bay's driving. I just thought that one was such a killer because we were headed for a scenario in which
that's
the Packers,
the Zach Bond pick, right?
Yeah. Multiple turnovers, injuries. We got a missed field goal in there. There's too many penalties. But they're still they're only going to be down 1 score. And, Philly squandered the next possession. So maybe it wasn't decisive anyway, but that was just such a killer in my mind. And then, once they lose Reed, they lose Dobbs. There's just so little in that receiving core. They had a series early in the third quarter when everything's going right, and they get 1st and goal on the like 8 or 9 after the PI flag on Mitchell, but then it's Josh Jacobs runs for like 2 or 3 yards, but then he loses all the yardage on a fumble, and then. And then who are we targeting? Malik Heath gets the next target. He slips out of his break and the ball falls to the ground. And then there's like an incompletion in the back of the end zone to Bo Melton. He's fine. But, it's this. Once we actually, we talked so much in the preseason about, oh, man, this receiving core is so deep. But once you actually drill down to like the 4th and 5th guys in the receiving core, and we have to target them in a postseason game against a great defense, it's different. And they were just out of answers as guys started to get hurt, and then they were really outgunned, and I felt like they had no chance.
Yeah, it's weird because, like, yes, obviously the fact that you're throwing passes to Bo Melton and like Malik Heath in very critical moments late in a playoff game is not ideal. And, look, they don't have Christian Watson in this game. And Watson's he's far from a perfect player. He's very flawed, but he is a guy that brings big plays. Dobbs has been like their best ISO receiver all year. He has a second concussion, scary concussion for him as well. And obviously a rough history. And then, when Reed goes out, like it just takes the whole ceiling from this. Like, that's rough. At the same time, like they've been trying to get touches for Bo Melton and Malik Heath all season long. Like it almost brings the entire thing into question of like, what were we doing here with this receiver room all year? Because these aren't just like, wow, never heard of this guy before. They play like real deal snaps for this team, which is just, again, a little strange when you have other players in front of them. Like we expected this to be a spread out receiver room, and that's exactly what happened. Dontavian Wicks leads this team in targets. I don't think people realize that. He led this team in targets this year with 76. Jaden Reed led it in catches and yards. Dobbs, when he was active, led the team in route participation. Christian Watson in yards per reception, and Tucker Kraft led the team in touchdowns. Like there wasn't a featured player. It was a collection of guys. And like honestly, Andy, I think Jordan Love's a good quarterback. He is certainly a hit for them. Like he's a guy that you can win. I think you can win with Jordan Love, but I don't think Jordan Love is Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, where he can like carry a collection of young, flawed players. And I think the fact that they've like rotated all these guys, and they truly have not empowered Jaden Reed to be a number one, even though he was playing great in this game. I think that's become a problem. So what is this ecosystem next year? Do you expect there to be a big receiver addition? Do you expect it to look basically just like it looked this year?
I think there should be a big receiver addition. I don't know that that's the way this team is going to operate. I'm pretty skeptical of that, but I would try. If I'm the Packers, I want to be in on whether it's T. Higgins or whoever is going to change teams that is going to be a real difference maker. I want to be in those.
That's the problem, though, Andy. I think it is like it's T. Higgins. Like, I mean, the rest of the free agent receivers are your boy Keenan Allen, Steph Diggs off an ACL, Chris Godwin off a serious injury. I mean, I just don't. None of those guys I think would really move the needle in that way. And I don't think maybe like Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams is available, but I don't think they're going down that road for a variety of reasons.
Right, and those would be weird. I mean, Devontae would be weird for one reason. T. Higgins would be a wild addition. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't see the Packers spending what it will be necessary to spend to get T. Higgins necessarily. I don't think it's happening. It is, that's not to get off this game too much, but one of the huge swing points in recent NFL history, of course, is the Packers' decision to pass on T. Higgins in favor of Jordan Love when they were one player away from winning a Super Bowl, perhaps, right? So it would be wild to see both Higgins and Jordan Love in Green Bay. I'm skeptical that it's going to happen, but that is the sort of player that they need, because they don't, they just don't have that, I know you're going to win in this critical moment, in this huge situation, and the other team knows where I want the ball to go, but it doesn't matter because you're T. Higgins, damn it. And like, we're going to find you. Like, they don't have that guy in the receiving room.
Yeah, and the problem is if they draft a round one rookie, which I think actually, because of the way this season ends, is going to be a popular first round pick for them. And I don't know a damn thing about the receiver class at this point. I don't know any of these guys from Andy Behrens, okay? I know nothing. But my guess is that, and the way I've heard people talk about the class is that, number one, they're picking deep in the first round. Like the rookie that they take might not even be better than Jaden Reed in his first season, you know? Like, so we'll see what happens with this Packers receiver room. But I still think Reed's coming off a great year. I'd want to bet on him. And if I'm Matt LaFleur, which, you know, Matt LaFleur knows more about football than me, I still think he's one of my favorite offensive play designers. I do think he leaves a little bit to be desired in like game management and things like that. But he's a top 10 coach in the league. He's great. But if I'm Matt LaFleur, I would be wanting, like, okay, how can we build up one of these guys, whoever it is, to become that player? Because I think that's probably their best path going forward. But that is also a projection. And I think it'll be interesting to discuss and debate the Packers offense. It's still a very young team, very good going forward, but coming off a disappointing end of the season for sure. Tucker Kraft actually said after the game, I thought this was interesting. He said, you could feel this brewing, like for us. And I thought that was very well stated. Because I think if you watch the end of the season, you could feel it brewing for the Green Bay Packers. Let's move to a game that definitely was a blowout. Bills 31, Broncos 7. I don't even know what we need to say about the Bills, Andy. The Bills are great. Josh Allen is awesome. Yeah. They'll be playing the Ravens next week, and we'll talk about that game for, I don't know, probably our entire lives.
Yeah, the Bills probably could have won this game in a few different ways. It was, I think, a pretty lopsided matchup. They chose a very run-heavy approach, especially early. First half, and it kept the score almost unnecessarily close. Buffalo only possessed the ball 3 times in the first half of that game. That was pretty crazy. They scored on a couple of them, so it didn't really matter. And they obviously they opened things up in the second half. I wondered a little bit if it was like a dress rehearsal for the way that they might want to play Baltimore. Baltimore obviously very good against the run, but I don't hate the idea of trying to shorten the game a little bit against the Ravens. I don't hate the idea of trying to avoid a shootout that ends 38-35 or something like that. Or I don't know if I want to go toe to toe with the Ravens offense necessarily. So I was thinking that might be a little bit of what was going on there. On the Bills side, incredible touchdown catch by Ty Johnson. He was awesome. He's had a sort of quietly really fun year. Curtis Samuel, your guy, catches the 55-yard TD. That was great.
Leading receiver for the Buffalo Bills in a playoff game, Curtis Samuel. You can never take it away.
I didn't think it was that great a game for Allen necessarily. He had a couple of misses against Denver. One of them to Coleman. He had another that he kind of sailed on an end zone target early. And like, this isn't fair, but you're gonna, like, one of the quarterbacks in next week's game is going to be near perfect, and that is the team that's going to win. So it's got to be a little tighter. And Allen is going to have to be near perfect. He can be. He's awesome. But yeah, overall not a very competitive game. You can still feel pretty good if you're a Broncos fan, right? Like, this is getting to the postseason was the win. The idea of going into Buffalo and getting a win was always going to be a little far-fetched. And we can also see a couple places where, man, you can make pretty small additions offensively for Denver, and you're going to be a lot better next year because they, you know, that running game isn't great. They have a desperate need for a tight end, and there's some good ones available in the draft. So there are obvious ways that they can improve.
Yeah, no, I echo a lot of what you said about with Buffalo, where it's funny. Like, we're talking about Josh Allen wasn't perfect. He was 20 of 26 and no turnovers. He gets 46 yards on 8 carries. But I agree, like, and it's funny, in a previous lifetime when Josh Allen wasn't this version of Josh Allen, if he had a couple of those like little hiccups that he did early in the game, you'd be like, oh boy, what's going to happen in this playoff game? But this is he is such a good quarterback at this point, and this is such a good ecosystem where Joe Brady's like the epitome of, we can throw different personnel packages at you, and we have all of these role players that continue to like Ty Johnson just being, I don't know, like a miracle as a receiving back is just so great. So yeah, we'll talk about the Bills a ton, but I do think the Broncos are fascinating to talk about, you know, because I mostly agree with you, Andy. It is disappointing that they go down and score 7 points on a 43-yard post route that was just, it's classic Bo Nix, and it's to Troy Franklin of all people, who I don't think has had a very good season this year.
Yeah.
But like that felt like, oh man, this is really impressive. But then I think the play calling left a little bit to be desired. It was very run pass for Denver. So I'd be a little like frustrated that this is how the season ended for the Broncos if I was a fan of the team. But it's still a very successful season, and you have a lot to be optimistic about. I mean, I thought this was going to be like one of the worst offenses in the league, and they were 16th in success rate, 18th in EPA per play, and I think a lot of that has to do with the quarterback that you drafted, Sean Payton, who I didn't know what to make of Sean Payton after last year, and it's definitely a great acquisition at this point, and one of the best offensive lines in the league. And now I'm with you that there are clear spots for upgrades, mostly in the backfield, man. I think there's not going to be, Saquon Barkley's and Derrick Henry's in this free agent class. That was a very unique circumstance. But if they can get a blue chip back in the draft, I think that this is one of those type of ecosystems that's actually a real, like if you look at under the hood, this is a pretty good, it's not a good run game. And like Broncos fans will rake you over the coals on social media if you call it a good run game, because like none of these backs are very productive. They never got consistent production from one back, but they were 13th this season in success rate on pure running back runs. That's like taking Bo Nix's scrambles out of it. But that almost has everything to do with the system and the offensive line and nothing to do with the running backs, because on those plays, Denver is 11th in yards before contact per rush and 28th in yards after contact per rush, which that's not always perfect, but I think it's a good emblematic like stat that if you drop a blue chip back in here, this could be one of those ecosystems, like maybe not to the degree of Philadelphia or Baltimore, but like a good rushing ecosystem that I think could be maximized and weaponized by a talented back.
Yeah, and listen, it can be a veteran that they sign in free agency. Like, I don't know, Najee's going to be out there and he's fine. He's not spectacular.
Okay, no, that's not what I'm talking about.
But I don't, I don't know that we have to. I don't even know that we have to draft it, because their options in the backfield were so poor this year, and obviously, it's a shame that Javonte just hasn't come all the way back, but he has not come all the way back. McLaughlin's a good player, but he's tiny, and you're just never going to feed him, consistently week after week, 20 touches a game. He's not necessarily built for that. It's not the best use of him. They just don't have a lot of answers in the backfield. So, like, I don't know. If I'm a Broncos fan, I'm fine if we bring in a boring vet. It's also a pretty good running back draft class, so there are going to be some options there. And then, man, the guy that I want, if I'm a Broncos fan, give me Tyler Warren. Let's throw a gadgety, really good tight end in here and see what, let's see what Sean Payton can do if you actually give him like an upgraded version of Taysom Hill, who's bigger and better as a receiver and can do all the things. That would really excite me too.
Yeah, I love that call on like a tight end or something. Just somebody to be a second high volume player, because you have interesting role players, like Mims and Devon Vele and these guys. I think like those are players you can have as role players, guys in Cortland Sutton's orbit. But I think you need one more like high volume player. As for free agent running backs, Najee Harris probably does lead the list, but then it's like Aaron Jones and Nick Chubb off another serious injury, J.K. Dobbins, Rico Dowdle. That is a very boring list. I think like Dowdle might be the best back in free agency right now, which is pretty stunning. All right, let's take our final break. When we come back, we will talk through the final two games of Wildcard Weekend right after this. All right, we're back. Andy, let's talk through the two Saturday games, starting with Ravens 28, Steelers 14. I don't know that we need to spend a ton of time on Baltimore, because we will talk about that Bills-Ravens matchup a ton on the preview show. But still, man, the Ravens, what another great offensive performance where if you dreamed in your mind's eye what the Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson pairing would do on a field, this is probably what it looks like.
Yeah, not to sound like just a meathead ball watcher here, but like one of these teams just dramatically out physicaled the other team. Pittsburgh runs for 29 yards on that. I know last segment, I'm talking up Najee Harris as a free agent. Pittsburgh just ran for 29 yards. Baltimore ran for 299. Derrick Henry tossing guys around. Isaiah Likely tossing guys around. It was not, there were moments in this game where it looked like these were like college teams from very different conferences, very different levels. Like this was a beating. this was really rough. You also, like, you cannot expect to hang with the Ravens if you don't even play a full game, and Pittsburgh just did not play a full game. You can't concede the first half and beat a team like Baltimore. I thought this game, honestly, again, I tend to look at a lot of playoff games through, like, let's find the real swing point here. I thought it effectively ended on Baltimore's final drive at the end of the second quarter. They cover 90 yards in just under 2 minutes. And the thing about it was they were actually they seemed willing to just run down the clock and get to halftime up 14, right? The first 2 plays of that drive were Derrick Henry runs that shoot up like 45 seconds. And then Pittsburgh calls timeout, which they probably have to do. You gotta play for the opportunity to get the ball back and like a minute to go and a chance to score, and maybe the situation isn't so dire. But then they don't stop them, and then Baltimore's like, okay, here's 25 yards, here's 20 yards, here's another 20 yards, and now we're going to clock it, and we've got whatever it was, 11 seconds, and Lamar is going to do some magical stuff, and there's Justice Hill with a walk-in touchdown, and we're done.
I mean, that's so well stated. I would have probably said that it was the game felt over before it even kicked off, quite frankly.
Yeah.
This is the one I expected to like the talent gap between two teams to be very dramatic. And listen, again, it could be fun to watch one team blow out another. It would be nice if this was competitive, but Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson just like exuding football joy with every single carry was definitely a treat to watch. You mentioned just the overall rushing yards from this team. Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson combined for 267 rushing yards in this game. That's the second most rushing yards by a quarterback running back duo in a playoff game in NFL history, trailing only Colin Kaepernick and Frank Gore's 300 combined rush yards in the 2012 divisional playoff, according to NFL Pro. Hey, like, by the way, that was when teams were still caught off guard by the zone read and like, oh boy, what do we do? We didn't have it. Pittsburgh. We'll get to the Steelers of all this, but like, good Lord, I mean, Pittsburgh. What did you expect to happen? Like, I know it's a little bit of a pick your poison, Sophie's choice type thing. Well, let's sell out to stop Derrick Henry. Well, then Lamar Jackson's going to pull that thing and rip us for big gains left and right. I get that it's a tough problem, but yeah, you looked like the 2012 Packers that just were completely flummoxed that a quarterback could keep the ball on a zone read. Yeah. And that was over 10 years ago.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there's so much distance between these two teams, and Pittsburgh probably got everything they could out of this season, given the quarterback situation, given some of their limitations. But what of all the fan bases that were attached to teams that lost in the wild card round, man, I might feel the worst if I'm a Pittsburgh fan, because I'm in the QB wilderness, right? We're too good to draft a good one. There are no obvious solutions available. I have some good answers on offense at different positions. I have a defense that I can feel okay about, but it's so stark, the gap between you and Baltimore right now, the gap between your offense and Cincinnati's offense right now, like just the divisional comparisons are so rough, and I don't know exactly how we get out of it.
Yeah, that's very well stated. I'm writing a piece for the website, just like kind of a postmortem on every team that lost, and like what's the first thing that they need to do, or like the main thing they need to do in the offseason. For Pittsburgh, it's easily the darkest of the teams. Yeah. I said stare into the abyss. Like, that's what they need to do, because that is where I think they're at, Andy, because this is the same way the Steelers season ends every year. And like, I don't mean to be dramatic, but it feels extremely heavy. I know we're like, Mike Tomlin's playoff history has been discussed ad nauseum. Just in recent years, since 2018, this is a very, very familiar refrain. They've won the division once in that stretch of time. that is the year, by the way, in 2020. It's the COVID year. It's a little weird. Joe Burrow tore his ACL. Lamar Jackson, obviously, what did he have COVID like 5 times that year? He obviously missed one game. He was dealing with some injuries. It was a down season for him. They win the division by a single contest in that particular year. And just ever since then, just since 2021, this team has lost to the Ravens, the Bills, and the Chiefs by a combined 49 points in their first playoff games. It's like, those are the teams you need to beat. Yeah. But you're so far from that. And like, how are they ever going to get off this just mediocre, like you said, quarterback wilderness? And like, Tomlin is just good enough as a floor raiser to never get them near where they need to be to draft a quarterback. And, like, what are they going to do this offseason? They're probably going to, I guess they're going to bring Russ back, but I think the last 4 games of the regular season in this game, pretty much that should put like a pin on the idea that he is the answer. That's not the case. And this team is ranked 24th in offensive success rate on average since 2021. And tell me how they're going to be better next year. Like, unless they sell out to make the offensive ecosystem significantly better, which I don't even know how they can do that, because like, your best player on offense is probably George Pickens, and I don't even think he's a guy you can count on. Like, that from a skill position standpoint, I know they have good players.
He's 2 weeks removed from a terrible game, an absolutely terrible game. Yeah.
And like, that's not the first time he's had a memeable worthy terrible game. And like, his effort is in question. He's, jawing with the fans, like, and that is their best skill position player by a lot. You can't walk into next season like that. And if they do, if it is something like that, I think they're just a deeply unserious franchise.
Yeah, well, their situation is compounded again by the fact that you've got Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson in the division, and those are 2 of the 3 best quarterbacks in football, right? There's such a crazy gap at the most important position, and Russell Wilson's fine, but fine is not going to get you through the AFC at any point. And it's weird to say, because one of the best things about Mike Tomlin is he always gets you to 9 or 10 wins, and he wrings so much out of every season. But you might have to bottom out and get yourself in a situation where you can get a quarterback without giving up like a boatload of draft picks or something like that. Like, you might have to actually go through a 3-win or 4-win season in order to rebuild in the way that you have to rebuild to compete in that division.
Yeah. You might have to think about like trading a TJ Watt type, which we talked about the Rams and the least expensive defense in the league. Pittsburgh is the most expensive defense in the league for the money they're putting into that defense, and to get that product out of it. Mm-hmm. This was a lifeless performance from the defense, and that was pretty embarrassing. TJ Watt, by the way, according to Mark Cabali, who's covered the team forever, he currently covers the team for the Pat McAfee show. TJ Watt, last 127 snaps of his 2024 season, 0 tackles, 0 assists, 0 sacks. Pretty rough finished for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I agree. They are the darkest timeline among any of these teams that lost, but they're not the only team that lost in a blowout fashion. Let's get to the final game here. Texans 32, Chargers 12. Texans definitely felt like this was going to be a classic Texans little milquetoast game early on, but things really broke open in the third quarter, Andy, where 5 minutes left in the third quarter, CJ Stroud threw to Deontay Johnson, his lone catch of the game, on a 3rd and 22 when the score was 10-6. He would be on the field for just 3 more plays by the time the game had reached 20-6 with less than 14 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Things changed pretty quickly for Houston, thanks to their defense, which we will certainly talk about.
Yeah, listen, this one, despite being a blowout, I felt like the Chargers should have won this game, which is crazy, because it's not. Final score not even close. There was a point late in this game where our play-by-play man was saying something to the effect of, "Oh, tomorrow everyone's going to be talking about this dominant Houston defensive performance," and I was thinking, buddy, like, that's just not how this works. We're like, everybody's going to be talking about Justin Herbert tomorrow. Yeah. I'm sorry to report.
I love Charles Davis. I think Davis is really good at his job. I think he's a good draft analyst. I think he's a good color commentator. Maybe leans a little bit too much on the optimistic side, Charles, again, wonderful human.
I wish that's how it worked.
I wish it was how it worked, and I wish I could be more like that.
I know, like that would be the right thing to do. And hey, Houston did really force some stuff, and they did play very well defensively, and they took advantage of miscues fully. But man, that was a winnable game. There's like early second quarter in this one. It's 6-0, Chargers leading. CJ Stroud has just thrown a terrible interception, and the Chargers get the ball in Houston territory. And then Herbert threw that pick on the deep ball to Quentin Johnson that had zero chance. There's a couple defenders between him and Johnson. It's across the field. It's deep. We're throwing to the wrong guy. Like that's just never gonna happen. It gets picked off, and then like things took a turn from there. They obviously. One of the other key plays in this one was that wild, I think it was 3rd and 16, and the snap gets away from Stroud, and like he dribbles it and he rolls out and somehow finds Hutchinson, and we get a first down out of that, and then the Texans are rolling. But that was such a winnable game for the Chargers, and I know it's ridiculous to say when it ends in the margin that it did, but man, tough one for Herbert. Of the 4 interceptions, 3 of them I thought were very much on him, really ugly balls. And then the other thing for the Chargers as a takeaway, Ladd McConkey's awesome. They got to find another guy.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, the Texans, man, this was when this was a game, like when you have stars and they shine bright in big moments, like this can happen. Nico Collins, like the Texans offense has its issues, but if they can hit Nico Collins on big inbreakers, they can win football games, especially against teams that they are just flat out more talented than. I was definitely very nervous about the Texans offense when they're feeding, John Mechie targets early. I'm like, this is not where we want to be, but I at least admired the fact that they opened up trying to throw the football as opposed to just let's run pass, get 1 yard on first down, 2 yards on second down, and then put CJ Stroud in a hopeless situation on third down, which has basically been the course of their season. They actually passed to run the ball, and credit to their run game too. It's one of the better performances that their run game has had, certainly down the stretch. I mean, Joe Mixon was completely unproductive down the stretch. I don't even think it's a Joe Mixon issue. So credit to the Texans offensive coaching staff, but also to the defensive coaching staff too. And D'Amico Ryans, this was just a great game plan. They have high end talent on that side of the ball. Their pass rushers, like Danico Autry was great in this game. Obviously, Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter, and the corners too. Derek Stingley's a stud. We know that, but Kamari Lassiter has quietly been a very, very good rookie corner all year long. He was making plays and playing very physical. They just looked. They looked like the tougher, more imposing team than the LA Chargers, who want to be a tough and imposing team. But I know this is gonna become a Herbert referendum game, which is a shame because what a great season for Herbert. And I think one of the more impressive feats of the Harbaugh coaching staff is that they got Herbert out of a lot of the bad habits that we've seen from him in terms of being like overly cautious. 8.6 air yards per attempt, 311 yards on scrambles, both career highs. Like he played with much more reckless abandon this season. I think the problem is he played with a lot of reckless abandon in this game, and it bit him. It bit him bad because I do think he put the ball in harm's way, but the lack of talent on the offensive interior of the line, where going against a Texans team that according to Fantasy Points data is 5th most in sacks off stunts in the regular season, that got him bad. And I mean, this receiving box score is outright hilarious. Ladd McConkey 197 yards. The second most receiving yards player is Will Dissly, who previously was like a blocking tight end and gifted the Texans one of those interceptions from Justin Herbert. Like that's just the state of the Chargers offense. They desperately need to add some more receiving talent and interior offensive line talent next year.
And Quentin Johnson had finished the season with double-digit targets, a really productive game, and then wild card round, 5 targets, no catches, at least 1 interception targeting Quentin. Just a really rough one. And if we can make him a player that we're only ever targeting him, like maybe it's 4 to 6 times a game. We take some shots with Quentin Johnston. We create some, space for him to operate and take some downfield shots. Cool. But he's probably not the answer next season as that number 2 option behind Ladd McConkey.
Oh, I would say he's definitely not the answer across from Ladd McConkey. He can be a nice, wide receiver 3 for you. And this is, some receivers are like this where, he has a great game in week 18 and he's all the way up here. And then the very next week, he's all the way down here. He's both players. He is capable of making plays for you. And he has had a much better season this year than his rookie season. Unfortunately, these games are still very much in the range of outcomes for Quentin Johnson. It's not even like the first disaster game that he's had this year. It just happens to come in a very big moment. And, when you're like, again, I'm not excusing Herbert. I think some of the Herbert commentary is going to be dumb after this game. Like, oh, Justin Herbert, we got to push him down the quarterback rankings. Okay, who are you pushing up? Sam Darnold? I mean, what are we talking about? What are we talking about here? Like, I think Herbert is still a guy that's very capable of like being a top 10 quarterback and somebody you can win a Super Bowl with. But when you face 11 quick pressures, 30.6% of your dropbacks, 5 unblocked pressures according to Next Gen Stats, and you have guys beside, like you only have one guy that can get open, you're going to have a pretty terrible performance. But again, Herbert does need to wear the crown of shame coming out of this performance.
3 interceptions in the regular season and 4 interceptions in the wild card round is really a tough scene. Plus, he's been to the playoffs twice. He's lost to Trevor Lawrence once and CJ Stroud once. It's rough, but obviously the talent level is extremely high. And this is another team a little bit like Denver. It's just the first year of the coaching staff. And they did some really impressive things. I actually thought they did some really impressive things on the fly. Like the Chargers had that early bye and they came out of it and we weren't running the ball 40 times a game anymore, right? They gave Herbert more opportunities. Like they evolved a little bit throughout the season. So they're still early in the lifespan of what they're building. They have some clear needs that can be addressed either through the draft or free agency, right? We've got to add to the running back room, and then we've got to find that second option, maybe even a third option in the receiving core. And those guys are out there. They're another team that's probably going to be in on one of the 2 big tight ends in this draft, and that's especially coming off a game where we had the Disley play that became the turnover. That is definitely an area that can be addressed. So this is another good landing spot for Warren. Potentially, he'd be really fun there. I think there are some obvious answers for this team and places where they can upgrade.
Yeah, you're definitely gonna have to fight me to get to draft Ladd McConkey next year. I think he's a great 2nd round pick. Just it's a shame it comes in a decisive loss, but this was a beautiful wide receiver performance by Ladd McConkey in this game, but they definitely need to add other bodies. Like he's a number 1. I think he could be your number 1 receiver, but I mean, you've got to add some supporting players, and I will be interested in drafting those supporting players because overall, there's still a lot of like Greg Roman-ish in this offense, but I do think it was a pretty good ecosystem this year, and I do think a lot of that comes back to a quarterback who had the best season of his career. But that is going to do it, Andy. That's all the games. Any other parting shots from Wild Card Weekend?
Parting shots? You know what? 2 plays. A couple plays that stick in my head among teams that have been recently eliminated. The Baker Mayfield run, that crazy spinning, pinballing first down run that he had in the Commanders game. That's going to stick with me. The crazy run that Josh Jacobs had that took him down to the 1 yard line. Like I'm sorry to see those 2 players go. They're 2 of my favorite players to watch. I thought they both had some thrilling moments in the wild card round. I'm sorry we won't be able to see them again until September.
That is a shame. Unfortunately, we get to continue to see Rashad Bateman, Curtis Samuel, all of the NFL greats continue to. Josh Jacobs, whoop-de-doo. We get to continue to see.
Let's talk about Jahan Dotson.
Yeah, let's talk about Jahan. Hey, Jahan Dotson needed almost a full 7 seconds to actually come up in the progression. That's how deep Jahan Dotson is in the reads for every single play. He needed that. Jalen Hurts, I think the time to throw was almost 7 seconds. It was at least above 6.5 seconds on that touchdown to Jahan Dotson. That's how we got to look at AJ Brown. We got to look at Devontae Smith. What's Saquon Barkley doing? Maybe let's take another look at AJ Brown, and then we get to Jahan Dotson.
And then he's the only one in the camera frame. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he's wide ass open. I mean, completely open in the end zone. That was pretty emblematic of the Jahan Dotson experience in Philadelphia. So that was a pretty funny one. But Andy, Appreciate you, buddy. This was great. Jam-packed show. A lot of takeaways for people to mull on before we get to the divisional round, which should be pretty electric. I mean, we have a lot of really great matchups to go over in that divisional round. And on that note, on Thursday, we will be back. Scott Pianowski will join me to preview the divisional round. Can't wait to find out what bet Scott and I land on with complete confidence, like the under in the Eagles-Packers first quarter to lose, on the last 19 seconds, even though it looked like it was lost right away. What a heartbreaking moment for Scott and I and our future bank accounts. But nevertheless, we will be here to preview the divisional round on Thursday. Until then, we are out.